The winter air bit through layers of worn fabric as Alara stood on the edge of the subway entrance, her bare fingers clutching the fraying strap of a second-hand guitar. She'd been standing in the same spot since dawn, just outside the rush of commuters, singing to faces that never looked up. Most people hurried past her like she was invisible, as if the sweet, aching tone of her voice belonged to the empty wind and not a living soul. Her breath made pale clouds in the icy morning, but the cold didn't matter. What mattered was the way music made her feel, like she still existed, like she still mattered in a world that had forgotten her. She sang songs she remembered from her childhood in the orphanage, old lullabies, church hymns, fragments of melodies her mother might have sung if she'd lived longer. Alara didn't remember her parents. She only remembered being 6, alone, in the gray walls of a home filled with children who all wanted to be somewhere else. She'd aged out of the system last year, right into the streets, where her voice became her only currency. Each morning she sang for coins, and each night she counted them under street lamps, careful to stretch what little she had between stale bread and cheap coffee. She had no phone, no address, and no one to call her name. But her voice was something pure, untrained but haunting, smoky with sorrow, soft like a prayer, and strong enough to stop strangers for just a heartbeat before they moved on again. It was during one of those morning shifts, beneath a frost-covered awning near 3rd and Lexington, that she noticed the man. He stood a few feet away, not watching her directly but angled just so, like a shadow that refused to fade. He came the next day, and the next, always silent, always still. He never gave her money, never clapped, but he never missed a note either. His coat was long, dark, clean, too clean for these streets. She wondered if he was lost. A tourist maybe. Or worse, someone with dangerous curiosity. She learned not to meet his eyes, pretended he wasn't there. But every time she glanced up, she found him unmoving, hands buried in his pockets, his gaze hidden behind dark glasses that didn't seem to belong in the overcast light of winter mornings. One evening, as Alara packed up, she found a folded envelope where the man usually stood. No name, no note, just cash. More than she made in a week. She looked around, heart pounding, but the street was empty. The next morning, she returned earlier than usual, half expecting to be alone. But he was already there, standing like a statue in the shadows. She considered thanking him, but something stopped her. Maybe pride, maybe fear. So she sang. Not for money that day, not for pity. She sang like she was singing to the sky, to her lost childhood, to the possibility of being heard. And when she finished, she thought she saw something shift in him, barely perceptible. A tilt of the head, a twitch of the hand, the faintest acknowledgement that he wasn't carved from ice after all. Days passed. Then weeks. The money appeared again, always in folded envelopes, always left without a word. Sometimes it came with coffee, sometimes with pastries too fresh to be from the street vendors. And still he never spoke, never smiled. Alara didn't know what to make of it. But she kept singing, and he kept listening. Then, one morning, she found the man gone. She waited longer that day, her voice faltering by noon, her breath shivering in the wind. Still, he didn't come. No envelope. No coffee. Just silence. She told herself it didn't matter. But that night she couldn't sleep. The street seemed colder somehow, louder and lonelier than before. 2 days passed before he returned. This time, he didn't stay in the shadows. He approached her slowly and set something beside her guitar case, a small device, like a professional audio recorder. He pressed a button, nodded once, and walked away without looking back. Alara stared at the machine. It blinked red. Recording. She didn't know what he wanted or why, but something in her chest stirred. Hope, or maybe fear disguised as hope. She began to sing, carefully at first, then with rising strength. She sang every song she knew, filling the empty street with sorrow and light, her voice echoing against stone walls and closed storefronts. When she stopped, she pressed the button again and looked around, but he was gone. The next day, there was no man, just another envelope. Inside was a note, her first from him. Neat handwriting. One line. You don't belong in the streets. Attached was a USB drive. Alara borrowed a computer from the library the next day. She slipped in the drive, her heart racing, unsure what she'd find. It was a video, grainy footage of her singing on the street. But the audio, it was perfect. Studio quality. Warm. Emotional. Raw. Whoever had mixed it knew what they were doing. At the end of the video was a logo, Novasound Records. She didn't know what it meant. But in her gut, she knew something had shifted. Her voice wasn't just drifting through the cold anymore. Someone had captured it, preserved it, shared it. The video had been uploaded to a platform she'd never heard of, and it had already gathered thousands of views. She closed the tab, hands trembling. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar clawing its way into her chest. Not hunger, not fear. Possibility. It terrified her more than anything else. Because possibilities could vanish. Like family. Like warmth. Like dreams you weren't allowed to keep. She didn't see the man for a week after that. But the city whispered differently now. People looked at her a second longer. Some even smiled. One person asked her name. She didn't answer. She didn't know how to trust it yet. But she kept singing. Because somewhere, somehow, someone had listened, and that changed everything. The frost gave way to rain as winter began to loosen its grip on the city, but Alara remained in her spot outside the subway, her voice now a regular presence for passers-by who had begun to slow down when they heard her sing. The world still spun with its indifference, cars rushed, people argued into phones, sirens wailed, but Alara had become a quiet, steady rhythm in the background of it all. Her songs, once unnoticed, were now being heard. Some mornings, people left more than coins. One dropped a scarf, another a small bag of groceries. But what shook her most were the voices that began to whisper her name. Alara. Not many knew it. Not even she had spoken it much aloud. But now, strangers repeated it gently, like it was a secret they'd been waiting to tell. The video had continued to climb, shared by someone, or many people, with reach. She didn't know how or why. She hadn't posted it. But every time she returned to the library and checked the site, the view count jumped by thousands. Then tens of thousands. Then hundreds. The comments were full of words she wasn't used to hearing. Hauntingly beautiful. She sings like she's lived 1,000 lives. Where can I find more? Still, the man hadn't returned. She watched for him every morning and scanned every street corner, every doorway. But he was gone. And just when she began to convince herself it was all some fluke, a moment of warmth in a long winter, he returned. It was raining hard that morning. Her fingers were stiff, her voice raw, but she sang anyway, because she didn't know how not to. The man emerged from the shadows like he always did, but something was different. He walked directly up to her, holding a small envelope and a weathered notebook. His hands shook slightly as he passed them to her. Alara took them with trembling fingers. Before she could speak, he turned and disappeared again into the blur of the city, vanishing like smoke. The envelope held a card, white, thick, elegant. No name, just a time and an address. Below it, one line written in the same clean hand. Sing for them the way you sang for me. The notebook was filled with notes, technical details, sketches of studio layouts, lyrics she didn't remember singing, transcribed in his hand. It was her life, documented through his silent eyes. Her voice, mapped and measured and honored. The pages fluttered like wings as she held it, pages of herself she didn't know had existed outside her own memory. The next morning, she went to the address. It was an unassuming building tucked between a deli and a bike repair shop. No signs. No logo. But when she knocked, the door opened, and the warmth inside hit her like sunlight after months of shadow. A woman with curly hair and round glasses greeted her with a knowing smile and led her into a studio that looked like something out of a dream. Alara barely breathed. The walls were lined with sound panels, microphones gleamed like jewels, and a soft hum filled the air, the heartbeat of a place made to capture truth. The woman explained everything. The man who had recorded her wasn't just a bystander. He was a producer, a once famous name in the underground scene, known for discovering raw, untouched talent. He'd vanished from the industry years ago after a personal tragedy, and no one had seen him since. Until now. Alara sat in the corner, notebook in her lap, as she listened to stories about him, how he never spoke, how he never worked with anyone anymore. But something in her voice had pulled him back, had stirred something in him he thought he buried. He heard something in you, the woman said softly, and he wanted the world to hear it too. The session began quietly. They asked if she was ready. She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. When she stood behind the microphone, her hands trembled. Her mouth felt dry. But then she remembered the street corner, the gray mornings, the sting of hunger, the cold that never let go, and she began to sing. It was different here. The silence was complete, not empty, but listening. Every note was captured, every breath preserved. Her voice filled the room, not with perfection but with pain, with longing, with memories of lullabies no one had sung and nights spent curled beneath newspaper blankets. The music wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished, but it was real, and it was enough. When she finished, the room was still. The producer stood behind the glass, his hand pressed against it like he needed to feel the vibration of her voice. He didn't speak. He never did. But the look in his eyes said more than words could. They worked together in silence for days. She never knew his name. He never asked hers again. They communicated through glances, gestures, the rhythm of the work. She came to understand him in the way she understood melody, quietly, completely, without needing explanation. And through him, her world expanded. She was introduced to people she never dreamed would care. Music directors, label scouts, influencers. She was invited to sing at a small live event hosted by an indie radio station. She wore borrowed clothes and shoes that didn't fit, but when she took the stage, she wasn't afraid. The room was small, the lights dim. She stood under a single beam, guitar in hand, heart hammering so loud she thought the microphone would catch it. But when the first note left her lips, everything faded. The crowd disappeared. The nerves melted. And she was back on the sidewalk, in the rain, singing like no one was listening, and like maybe someone was. When she finished, there was silence. Then an eruption of applause so sudden it startled her. Someone cried out her name. Not in mockery. Not in pity. But like they were proud to know it. Afterward, she found herself in a corner of the venue, curled over a paper cup of tea, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. She didn't know what this meant, if it was a beginning or another fleeting moment. But when she looked up and saw the silent man standing at the back of the room, his eyes bright, his face unreadable, she felt something settle inside her, like a compass finding north. Because whatever this was, wherever it led, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Her voice had found its way into the world, and somehow, someone had followed it back to her. The days that followed moved like a dream, slow and soft, but full of unfamiliar momentum, as if time had begun to bend in her favor for the first time in her life. Alara found herself waking up in warm places, sometimes in a studio couch, sometimes in guest rooms offered by people who claimed to be moved by her story. But no matter where she slept, her guitar always lay beside her, like a piece of her past she refused to lose. Offers began to pour in: small gigs, radio interviews, even a podcast invite, but she still returned to that street corner every few mornings, singing not for fame or attention now, but to stay connected to the ground beneath her feet, to the version of herself that had once sung only to survive. It reminded her what the sound meant, how it had kept her breathing when the world had gone silent. She hadn't seen the man in days, though his presence was everywhere. His notebook still lay in her backpack, his card still sat folded in her coat pocket. And every step she took into this strange, bright new world felt like a continuation of his unheard voice guiding her forward. But there was one thing she had never dared to ask him, something that had curled like smoke in the corners of her mind. Why her? Why this voice, this moment, this intervention? He had lifted her from shadows without asking for anything in return. But silence, she knew, sometimes held the heaviest truths. It was on a gray Wednesday when everything changed again. She arrived at the studio for what was meant to be another recording session, only to find the door ajar, the lights off. Inside, a single note lay on the console, written in the same clean, deliberate hand. Don't look for me. Just keep singing. That was it. No signature, no explanation. The woman with the curly hair arrived moments later, as confused as she was. She confirmed what Alara already feared. The man had disappeared. No one knew where he'd gone. His phone was off. His belongings were gone. His name not even on the lease. It was like he had never existed, except in the changes he'd made in her life. The silence he left behind wasn't empty, it was full of echoes. She tried to return to her new rhythm, but something was missing. She sang with the same voice, wrote songs with the same hands, smiled the same careful smile when people praised her. But inside, she was restless. She needed to understand who he had been, what he had seen in her, what he had been running from. She began searching, quietly at first, using the notebook as her map. Hidden between notes on sound and performance were fragments that didn't belong. Addresses, scribbled initials, a photograph of a young girl with a guitar and a man beside her, smiling, alive. Not Alara. Someone else. The woman at the studio recognized her. That was Lily, she said softly. His daughter. She died in an accident. Years ago. Alara felt her breath catch. She sang too, the woman continued. Beautiful voice. He used to produce her music. They were going to release an album together. The week after the crash, suddenly, everything made sense. The way he watched her, the quiet way he worked, the ache behind every gesture. He hadn't just heard a voice. He had heard something lost, something he thought he'd never feel again. And now, Alara understood the gift he had given her. It wasn't just a platform. It wasn't exposure or fame. It was healing for both of them. The next day, she returned to the street corner where it had all begun. It was cold again, almost the same kind of morning when they first met. She pulled out her guitar and sat down on the concrete, despite the stares of people who now knew her face from screens and magazine features. She began to sing, not a song from memory, but one she'd written, about loss, about hope, about a man who never spoke but changed everything with his silence. People gathered, curious at first, then still. Phones came out. But Alara didn't sing for them. She sang for the echo of footsteps that might never return, for a ghost who had shown her that music could resurrect more than dreams. It could rebuild hearts. Weeks later, a letter arrived at the studio, addressed to her. The handwriting was the same. Inside was a flash drive, a bank statement with her name, and a short message. The label is yours now. I've made the arrangements. You'll know what to do. Alara's hands shook as she read it. The silent man had vanished from her life, but he had left behind his legacy in her care. She now held the reins of the very studio that had given her a second life. And with it came a purpose she hadn't known she needed. She reopened the studio under a new name, Lily's Echo. The first project was hers, a debut album filled with the songs she once whispered to empty streets. The second was a collaboration with other street musicians, the ones no one saw. She found them in alleyways, in tunnels, on sidewalks, singing to no one. She gave them the space he had given her. And in doing so, she found the truest expression of gratitude, not in words, but in action, the way he had taught her, the way he had loved, silently, through music. On the night of her album release, the venue was packed. Lights, cameras, a crowd she never imagined would know her name. But as she walked onto the stage, she searched the darkness for a figure in a long coat, standing silently at the edge of the light. She didn't see him, but she felt him, in every string of her guitar, in the hush of the crowd, in the breath she took before the first note. She sang, and the silence listened. And somewhere, she hoped, he heard it too. The final song of the night was for him, a new piece, unrecorded, unnamed. A song that didn't ask for applause or recognition. Just presence. Just memory. Just a thank you, carried on a melody. When it ended, she closed her eyes, and for a moment, the world felt still, whole, at peace, because he had given her more than a voice. He had given her a place in the world, and she would spend the rest of her life doing the same for others. She stepped off the stage, heart full, the crowd on their feet. The world had changed around her, but deep inside, she was still that girl on the street corner, singing into the wind, waiting for someone to listen. And now, finally, they did, because one silent man had heard her first and refused to let her be forgotten.